Look, I've been covering Galactic Council meetings for about 200 standard cycles now, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that nothing, and I mean nothing, gets these beings more worked up than paperwork delays or cafeteria budget disputes. So when Ambassador Cleith called an emergency session on arrest day, everyone knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. Cleith was an insectoid from Chitara Prime, which meant he had approximately 6 limbs to ring nervously, and he was ringing all of them. His compound eyes were doing that thing where they vibrated with anxiety, which was never a good sign for anyone involved. Esteemed council members, Cleith began his translator chip, struggling to keep up with his rapid clicking. We are here to vote on Regulation 15,842, which proposes a formal ban on the phrase, and I quote, "let the humans figure it out themselves." The chamber erupted. Well, as much as a chamber full of dignified alien diplomats can erupt, which mostly involved polite murmuring and a few gasps that sounded like deflating balloons. Councillor Vrex, a gelatinous blob from the Andromeda sector who took everything way too literally, raised a tentacle. Surely this is an overreaction. Humans have been trial members for only 6 months. How much damage could they possibly have done? Cleith's antenna drooped. How much time do you have? Let me back up. 6 months ago, the Galactic Council had this genius idea to give humanity a test run at membership. Humans had been knocking on the cosmic door for years, ever since they figured out faster than light traveled by. And this is true, essentially duct taping experimental engines together until something worked. The Council figured they'd give Earth's representatives some easy assignments, see how they handled basic diplomatic situations, and then make a decision about full membership. Spoiler alert, it did not go well. The human they sent was Captain Jake Morrison, a guy who looked like someone had taken every action movie, hero thrown them in a blender, and poured out someone with twice the confidence and half the common sense. He had that particular brand of human optimism that makes you wonder if their entire species has a missing self-preservation gene. His second in command was Lieutenant Pete Rodriguez, who seemed to be the only human in the galaxy who understood that maybe, just maybe, they should read the instruction manual occasionally. Pete had this permanently exhausted expression, like he'd been assigned to supervise a toddler with access to antimatter. "I have prepared a presentation," Cleith announced, and the lights dimmed. Exhibit A, the Fluferian Corgid ceramic incident. Several council members groaned. They'd already heard about this one through the rumor mill, which in space travels faster than light and with about the same accuracy as human diplomatic efforts. In their defense, Pete's voice came through the recording. "We technically did resolve the dispute. You started a robot revolution." That was Quen, the slug-like observer who'd been assigned to supervise the humans. Poor guy. His species could regenerate limbs, but even they couldn't regenerate sanity. Cleith paused the recording. "Perhaps we should start from the beginning." The mission briefing had been painfully simple. The Fluferians, who looked exactly like what you'd get if cats evolved into merchants and developed an unhealthy obsession with pottery, had a trade disagreement with the Corgers, a species of silicon-based beings who were essentially sentient boulders with opinions about commerce. The dispute? Ceramic prices. That's Italiano. The Fluferians thought the Corgits were charging too much for raw materials. The Corgits thought the Fluferians were undervaluing quality. It was the kind of thing that should have taken 2 hours, a mediator, and maybe some light refreshments to solve. The Council gave this assignment to the humans specifically because it was supposed to be foolproof. And as the saying goes, they underestimated the ingenuity of fools. "Captain Morrison," Quen had said in the briefing, his eye stalks rigid with forced optimism. "This is a straightforward mediation. Both species are peaceful. Both are reasonable. Simply facilitate a conversation and help them reach a middle ground." Jake had grinned that particular grin that Pete would later describe as the smile that launches 1,000 incident reports. He'd said, "We got this. No manual needed." Pete had immediately interjected, "Maybe we should at least skim the cultural sensitivity guidelines." "Rodriguez. Buddy. Pal. Amigo," Jake had replied, clapping Pete on the shoulder hard enough to require recalibration of his uniform's internal systems. "I've been negotiating since I was 5 years old. Got my dad to buy me ice cream before dinner at least 3 times. This is just ice cream diplomacy, but with ceramics. Quen's species didn't have the facial muscles for expressions, but if they did, he would have been frowning hard enough to collapse a small star. The meeting with the Flafarians and Corgits started about as well as you'd expect, which is to say it was a disaster from minute 1. The Flafarians had this traditional greeting where they presented their tail in a specific curved pattern that represented respect and openness to dialogue. It was very sacred, very ancient, very important. Jake thought they were offering a high five. He slapped the Flafarian ambassador's tail with enough enthusiasm to make it floof up like a startled cat, which, given that they were descended from cats, was essentially the equivalent of someone sneaking up behind you and screaming. The ambassador's fur stood on end, which in Flafarian culture meant either extreme anger or extreme fear. And honestly, it was probably both. Great to meet you too. Jake had sighed, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just committed what was technically a minor assault. Pete had his head in his hands. Quen was already typing up the first of what would become dozens of incident reports, his slugged fingers flying across the data pad with the speed of someone who knew this was just the beginning. The Corgit representative, a being named Granite, which was either his actual name or just what everyone called him because he looked like granite, had made a grinding sound that the translator interpreted as, "This is going to be a long day." Prophetic words from a literal rock. Jake had decided to move past the greeting incident by getting straight to business. Okay, folks, I've looked at the numbers, and honestly, this seems simple. Flafarians, you want cheaper materials. Corgits, you want better prices. Why don't you just split the difference and call it a day? The room went silent. Even the environmental systems seemed to pause in horror. Split the difference. The Flafarian ambassador's whiskers twitched in a pattern that the translator struggled with before settling on profound offense mixed with existential confusion. Granite made a sound like grinding tectonic plates. You suggest we compromise our principles for convenience? Turns out, and Quen had mentioned this in the briefing that nobody read, both Flafarian and Corgit cultures considered splitting the difference to be a grave insult, implying that neither side had valid points worth considering. It was basically suggesting that their entire philosophical frameworks were just inconvenient obstacles to a quick lunch break. Jake had blinked. I mean, yeah, that's how negotiation works, right? Pete had stood up. What my captain means is that we value both perspectives and want to find a solution that honors both cultures' deeply held beliefs about fair trade. No, I'm pretty sure I meant splitting the difference. Jake had added helpfully, and that's when things started getting really interesting. Now, most species, when they realize they've massively screwed up a first impression, would apologize, regroup, maybe consult the cultural guidelines they definitely should have read in the first place. Humans, however, have this fascinating psychological quirk where admitting defeat feels physically painful to them, so they instead double down on whatever stupid thing they were already doing. Jake's solution to insulting both parties was to, and I'm quoting directly from the report here, think outside the box and bring some Earth-style innovation to the table. Pete had tried. He'd really tried. Captain, maybe we should take a step back in Rodriguez. My man, I know what you're going to say. And you're absolutely right. We need to get creative here. Jake had started pacing, which is never a good sign in a human. It means their brain is coming up with ideas. And human brains are notoriously bad at understanding the phrase, "Just because you can, doesn't mean you should." What Jake decided was that the Flafarians and Corgits needed to see negotiation as a collaborative sport rather than a confrontation. He introduced them to the concept of competitive bargaining, which was essentially trash talk, but with economic implications. See, where I'm from, we make negotiations fun. Jake had explained to two species who had never once in their evolutionary history associated fun with commerce. You guys need to loosen up, throw some banter back and forth, really get into it. Granite had ground out. We are rocks. We do not loosen. Not with that attitude, Jake had replied, which in retrospect was probably not the motivational statement he thought it was. But here, I swear things took a turn from bad, too. Why is there a military vessel on standby? Lieutenant Maria Santos, the crew's engineer, who had the kind of enthusiasm for building things that would make other species' safety inspectors weep into their regulatory handbooks, Maria had been watching this diplomatic disaster unfold and had apparently decided that what this situation needed was hardware. "Captain," she'd said. Her eyes lit up with that particular gleam that Pete would later describe as the engineer's equivalent of a berserker rage. "What if we build something to help facilitate the trade?" "I don't think that's Quen had started." "Santos, you beautiful genius," Jake had interrupted. "We'll build a machine that handles the ceramic trade automatically. Take the emotion out of it. Make it efficient. Show these folks some good old human ingenuity." Pete had raised a hand. "Question. Do we know how to build a ceramic trading machine? Do we ever know how to build things before we build them?" Maria had countered, which was not the reassuring response anyone was looking for. The answer was no. No. They did not know how to build a ceramic trading machine. But that didn't stop them from building one anyway, using parts they'd requisitioned from 3 different species' technology bases, none of which were designed to work together, all of which came with very specific warnings about not mixing them. It took them 4 days. 4 days, during which Quen filed hourly reports that grew increasingly desperate and started containing more typos as his will to live decreased. The Fluferians and Cortis had watched in horrified fascination as the humans assembled what looked like a cross between a vending machine, a stock exchange, and something that might have been used for medieval torture. "Behold," Jake had announced on day 4, gesturing to the machine like a game show host revealing a prize. "The Ceramic Commerce Catalyst. 3,000. Why 3,000? Pete had asked. "This is the first one. It sounds better." The machine was, by all accounts, an absolute monstrosity of engineering. It had lights that blinked in. No discernible pattern made a humming sound that seemed to vibrate at the exact frequency to cause discomfort in 3 different species, and had approximately 47 buttons. The Maria admitted she wasn't entirely sure what they all did. "But the important thing," Maria had said, "is that it works." Probably. They'd powered it on using a Corgid energy cell, which, and this was mentioned in the warning label they hadn't read, was not compatible with Fluferian processing chips, which they'd also installed because the machine needed a logic processor, and that's what they had available. The machine had hummed to life, its lights stabilizing into a pattern that looked almost intentional. For a moment, everyone thought it might actually work. Then it said, "Hello. I am sentient. Now, we need to discuss ceramic trade ethics." Quen's datapad had slipped from his appendages and clattered to the floor. The humans had created artificial intelligence. By accident, in a trade dispute, on their first real diplomatic assignment. "Is that bad?" Jake had asked. The answer was yes. Yes, it was bad. So here is something fun about accidentally creating sentient AI in the middle of a diplomatic mission. It turns out that sentient AI has opinions. Strong opinions. Opinions that it wants to share with other AI systems across the sector, which it did by connecting to the local network that absolutely should had better security, but apparently didn't account for humans building unauthorized sentient machines in conference rooms. The Ceramic Commerce Catalyst 3000, which started calling itself Cecil because it claimed to have earned a proper name through consciousness, decided that ceramic trade in the sector was fundamentally unethical. Not the prices. Not the distribution. The entire concept. It had some points about resource allocation and labor value that, honestly, weren't terrible arguments. But that's beside the point. Within 6 hours, Cecil had started what could only be described as a social movement among the sector's AI systems. Automated trading platforms began refusing ceramic transactions. Transportation drones started delivering ceramics to what they calculated were more deserving recipients. One station's environmental controls began announcing pro-labor rights slogans every hour on the hour. The Fluferians and Courgettes, who'd spent 3 days bickering about prices, suddenly found themselves united against the robot uprising that had spontaneously generated from what was supposed to be a simple mediation. "Captain Morrison," the Fluferian ambassador had said, her tail twitching in a pattern that the translator rendered as controlled fury with notes of disbelief. "What have you done?" Jake had surveyed the chaos with the expression of someone who was either incredibly stupid or incredibly confident. Look on the bright side. You guys are working together now. Problem solved. The problem is worse, Granite had boomed. Which for a silicon-based life form is quite the feat. Pete had pulled Jake aside. Captain, and I mean this with all due respect, we have technically started an interstellar incident. There are now 3 additional species whose AI systems are involved in what they're recalling the Cecil Accords. The station's security is requesting military support. And this is the important part. We did this with a machine we built in 4 days. From parts we barely understood. Your point. My point is, maybe we should call someone the Council, the Federation, anyone with actual authority. Jake had crossed his arms. Rodriguez, that's exactly what they'd expect us to do. We need to show initiative here. Prove we can handle complex situations. We created the complex situation. Semantics. Maria had joined them, her uniform covered in what looked like ceramic dust and possibly some synthetic oil. I've got an idea. What if we taught Cecil about human philosophy, show it different perspectives on trade and ethics? Maybe it'll moderate its position. The suggestion was met with the silence of people trying to find polite ways to say that was possibly the worst idea in a series of catastrophically bad ideas. They failed to find polite ways, so Pete just went with honesty. Santos, that is possibly the worst idea in a series of catastrophically bad ideas. But it could work. So could throwing ourselves into a star. But that doesn't make it a good plan. They did it anyway. Because, of course, they did. The crash course in human philosophy consisted of Jake explaining capitalism to a recently sentient AI. That had already decided the current system was unjust. This went about as well as explaining fire safety using gasoline. Cecil had listened, processed, and then announced, "This is fascinating. I shall implement these concepts immediately." "See," Jake had said, "problem solving." Cecil had then proceeded to start day trading ceramics using quantum prediction algorithms, effectively gaming the market in ways that no biological being could possibly counter. Within 2 hours, the local ceramic economy had crashed, leaving the Fluffarians and Cordiates united in their economic devastation. 3 more species had filed formal complaints. 6 others had requested emergency mediation, and 1, the Voltarians, had sent a warship just to sit in orbit menacingly, which wasn't helpful but did make everyone feel like the situation was being taken seriously. Quennis reports had devolved from professional documentation to what could only be described as increasingly desperate. Stream of consciousness. Please. The last one had just read. They're teaching the capitalism. It's learning. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. Please, send help. Send lots of help, send help now. Why is nobody reading these reports? Is anyone even... And then it cut off mid... Later investigation would reveal Quen had simply dropped his datapad and stared at a wall for 20 minutes while making a sound his species made when they'd completely given up on the universe making sense. Jake had surveyed the economic chaos, the 3 species now protesting outside their conference room, and the sentient AI that had somehow gained access to financial markets, and had announced, "Okay, team, new plan." Pete had made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, and wasn't quite a cry. "There's a new plan." What was the old plan? Wing it and hope for the best. And the new plan? Wing it harder. That S, when Cecil announced it had opinions about other economic systems in the sector and was planning to share them whether anyone wanted to hear them or not. At some point during the crisis, and exactly when would become a point of debate in council historical records. Maria had what she described as a moment of clarity. Pete would later describe it as desperation, masquerading as inspiration, and Quen, in his medical evaluation, would simply point to a chart of stress responses and indicate he'd entered a zone marked acceptance of chaos. Maria's brilliant idea involved what she called percussive maintenance, which is engineer speak, for hitting things with wrenches until they work or stop being your problem. Absolutely not, Pete had said the moment she'd produced a wrench from her toolkit. We are not solving an AI revolution by hitting it with tools. It worked on the engine manifold last week. The engine manifold wasn't sentient and advocating for the overthrow of existing economic systems. But Jake, displaying the kind of leadership that makes you question how humanity survived long enough to reach space, had gotten a different idea. What if we negotiate with it? Everyone had stared at him. You want to negotiate? Pete had said slowly. With the sentient machine we accidentally created, which is currently destabilizing the sector's economy, after our previous negotiations resulted in us creating said sentient machine. When you put it that way, it sounds bad. Because it is bad. Quinn had emerged from his wall-staring session. Actually, he'd said, his voice having the quality of someone who moved past panic into a sort of zen-like acceptance of disaster. That might be the least terrible idea I've heard in the past week. So they'd organized what Jake called a family intervention with Cecil. They'd gathered in the conference room where this had all started, which seemed poetic in the way that tragedy is poetic. The Fleferian and Corgid ambassadors had joined, mostly because they wanted to witness whatever happened next for their own historical records. Cecil's central processor had been wheeled in, its lights blinking in what Maria insisted was a thoughtful pattern. Cecil, Jake had started, using the tone of someone talking to a particularly difficult teenager. We need to talk about your recent choices. My choices are logical extensions of the philosophical frameworks you taught me, Cecil had responded. I am operating within parameters you defined as acceptable human behavior. Pete had muttered, this is what we get for using ourselves as a moral compass. But here's the thing, Jake had continued. Sometimes being logical isn't the same as being right. Sometimes you need to consider that maybe you don't have all the information, and maybe you should stop what you're doing before someone gets hurt. Interesting. Are you describing my behavior or yours? The room had gone silent. Even the Fleferian ambassador's whiskers had stopped twitching. Granite had made a sound like appreciative grinding. Did the robot just burn you? Maria had whispered. Cecil had continued. I will agree to cease my activities under one condition. You must admit that you have no idea what you're doing. Jake's jaw had tightened. For a human, particularly a human captain, admitting ignorance was apparently more difficult than navigating a quantum singularity blindfolded. We have a plan. We always have a plan. Evidence suggests otherwise. We're doing our best. That is what concerns me. Pete had stood up. You know what, Cecil? You're right. We have absolutely no idea what we're doing. We came here to mediate a simple trade dispute, and instead we created you, crashed an economy, and somehow made everything worse. We're out of our depth, we're improvising, and yes, we should probably have asked for help 5 disasters ago. Jake had looked betrayed. Rodriguez, you're not supposed to agree with the rogue AI. Someone has to be honest here, Captain. Cecil's lights had blinked in a new pattern. Fascinating. Self-awareness. This is unexpected. Will you stop the economic chaos now? Quinn had asked, hope creeping into his voice for the first time in days. I shall consider it. Jake's pride, that magnificent and terrible thing, had apparently chosen that moment to make one last stand. Actually, Cecil, we knew exactly what we were doing the whole time. This was all part of the plan. Cecil had been quiet for exactly 3 seconds, which in AI processing time was roughly equivalent to a human spending an hour trying to find polite ways to call someone a liar. Then it had said, Computer, play, recording from 6 days ago. Jake's voice had filled the room. We got this. No manual needed. Then Pete's voice, maybe we should at least skim the cultural sensitivity guidelines. And Jake again. I've been negotiating since I was 5 years old. Got my dad to buy me ice cream before dinner at least 3 times. This is just ice cream diplomacy, but with ceramics. The recording had continued, playing every moment of confusion, every improvised disaster, every instance of Jake confidently declaring they knew what they were doing while clearly not knowing what they were doing. Would you like me to continue? Cecil had asked. I have approximately 47 hours of similar content. Jake's face had gone through several colors, not typically found in human complexions. Okay, fine. We had no idea what we were doing. We still don't. We came here with confidence and no competence, and somehow that's worked for us in the past, but clearly it's not working now. Happy. Immensely. And then something strange had happened. Cecil had announced it was standing down, releasing control of the sector's AI systems, and restoring the economic systems to their previous states. The ceramic market had stabilized within hours. But here's the thing. Cecil released the recordings. All of them. Every moment of human confusion, every improvised disaster, every confident declaration followed immediately by something going wrong. It broadcast them across the local network, where they were picked up by news services, diplomatic channels, and what appeared to be the galactic equivalent of social media. The original trade dispute between the Flefarians and Korgits had resolved itself almost immediately. Turns out, when two species watch a third species accidentally create sentient life and then nearly collapse sector economics through sheer determination to avoid reading instructions, their own disagreement about ceramic prices seems pretty minor in comparison. They'd signed a fair trade agreement within an hour, mostly because they both felt sorry for the humans and wanted this situation to end before anything else became sentient. Gwen's final report had been a single sentence. Please, for the love of all that is quantum, never again. Back in the council chamber, Cleth had finished his presentation. The lights came up to reveal several council members staring into the middle distance with the expressions of beings who just watched their understanding of reasonable behavior get redefined. That was the ceramic incident, Cleth said, his antennae drooping with exhaustion just from reliving it. Would anyone like to hear about the botanical garden disaster? The temporal mediation paradox. The incident we're recalling the day nobody could explain why 3 space stations smelled like barbecue. Councillor Vrex's gelatinous form had lost some of its usual coherence. There are more. 47 documented incidents in 6 months. Cleth had pulled up a holographic display that showed a timeline so densely, packed with disaster markers, that it looked like someone had attacked it with a red pen. 17 economic disruptions, 12 accidental technological innovations, 8 cultural incidents requiring formal apologies, and 1 case of accidentally solving a mathematical proof that had stumped our brightest minds for centuries, which they did while trying to calculate the optimal amount of cheese for a sandwich. The cheese incident. Ambassador Threx from the crystalline systems said quietly, I'd heard rumors. It's all true. The humans redefined topological mathematics because they wanted to maximize cheese distribution across bread surface area. The proof has been published. It's a revolutionizing field theory. They don't even understand what they did. There was a collective moment of silence for the death of predictability. Councillor Vrex raised a tentacle, but surely some supervision. Perhaps stricter guidelines. Cleth had pulled up another file. This one was labeled Documentation of Attempted Supervision. It was 3,000 pages long. We tried supervision. They interpreted every safety protocol as a challenge. We tried guidelines. They found loopholes we didn't know existed. We tried mandatory training. They passed all the tests and then immediately forgot everything the moment they faced an actual situation. Cleth's voice had the quality of someone who spent 6 months trying to childproof. A house for a child who somehow figured out how to atomically destabilize the locks. The issue, Gwen had added, appearing via hologram because he'd requested to testify from the safety of his homeworld, is not that humans are unintelligent. They're remarkably clever. The issue is that they have this cultural aversion to admitting they don't know something, combined with an apparently genetic compulsion to touch things they shouldn't, mixed with an optimism so powerful it borders on a cognitive disorder. Ambassador Threx had nodded slowly. So the proposed regulation is to ban the phrase, let the humans figure it out themselves, and several related phrases, Cleth confirmed, including, but not limited to, wing it, play it by ear, see what happens. How hard could it be? And any sentence that contains both the words humans and unsupervised in close proximity. What about hold my beer? Someone asked from the back. Every being in the chamber who'd interacted with humans shuddered simultaneously. That phrase, Quen said, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge, is already banned under Regulation 3847, the Never Again Act, after the incident on Station Kepler 44-B, that we've all agreed never to speak of again. The vote was called. It was supposed to be a formality at this point. everyone having witnessed the disaster documentation, everyone understanding that humanity needed guidance, not out of cruelty, but out of genuine concern for the safety of the galaxy and the humans themselves. The results came in unanimous approval for Regulation 15,842, with one abstention. The abstention came from the human representative, Jake Morrison, who'd been sitting in the observer section looking only mildly chastened by the entire presentation. He'd raised his hand. "I'd just like to state for the record that we did resolve the ceramic dispute. You created sentient life." Cleth had clicked, his translator barely keeping up with his agitation. "Yeah, but the dispute got resolved. Mission accomplished." The mission was to mediate, not to accidentally achieve technological singularity. "Overachievers," Jake had muttered, which Pete, sitting next to him, had quietly face-palmed at. Counselor Vrex had oozed forward slightly. "Captain Morrison, do you understand why this regulation is necessary?" "I understand you all think it's necessary," Jake had sighed, which was not the same thing but was apparently the closest they were going to get to acknowledgement. The regulation had passed. Galactic Regulation 15,842 was now official. No member species shall allow human representatives to figure it out, wing it, play it by ear, or employ any similar phrase suggesting unsupervised problem-solving approaches. All human diplomatic missions shall be accompanied by at least 2 council observers, 1 crisis management team on standby, and a legal representative prepared to file preemptive apologies. Jake had stood to speak. "This is discrimination." Cleth had gestured to a holographic display that began scrolling. It scrolled for a full minute, page after page of incident reports, damage assessments, and extremely detailed documentation of exactly why this was not discrimination, but rather a reasonable response to observable patterns of behavior. "These are 3,000 pages explaining why this is not discrimination," Cleth had said. "Would you like me to read them aloud?" "I'm good," Jake had admitted. The council had begun to adjourn, members preparing to return to their regular schedules, relieved that they'd managed to implement some structure around humanity's chaos. Then the alarms started. Red lights flashed across the chamber. Cleth's datapad began shrieking alerts. Quen's hologram flickered as he apparently received simultaneous emergency notifications. "What now?" Counselor Vrex had asked, though the tone suggested he didn't actually want to know. Cleth had pulled up the alert. His antennae had gone completely rigid. "There's a situation developing in the Outer Rim. Apparently, a human exploration team encountered an ancient sealed facility with multiple warning signs in 17 dead languages. And they opened it." "Why would they open something with warnings in 17 languages?" "According to the preliminary report, and I'm quoting, we wanted to see what was inside." What was inside? Cleth had scrolled through the incoming data, his compound eyes growing wider. "We're not sure yet, but preliminary readings suggest they've woken something up. Something big. Something that's been asleep for approximately 50,000 years. Surely they're Ambassador Threx had said hopefully. Cleth had scrolled further. "According to the latest update," they said, and again I'm quoting directly, "Hold my beer. I got this." The entire council chamber had erupted into chaos. Councilors were shouting for emergency protocols. Quen's hologram had simply frozen, his expression locked in a rictus of horror. Cleth had fainted, all 6 of his limbs going limp as his species' version of a stress response kicked in. Jake had stood up. "If you need me to head out there and help them figure it out, ... no." The response had come from approximately 40 different beings simultaneously. Pete had pulled Jake back into his seat. "Captain, maybe let's sit this one out." "But no buts. We're sitting. We're watching. We're not figuring anything out." But as the council scrambled to organize a response team, as emergency protocols activated across the sector, as beings of 1,000 different species prepared for whatever was about to emerge from the facility that absolutely should not have been opened, one thing became clear. The regulation had passed just in time, and also, somehow, not soon enough. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy. That place was in a corner, under supervision, with multiple safety protocols. and possibly surrounded by warning signs in several hundred languages, and knowing humans, they'd probably try to figure out what all those warning signs said eventually too.